Coming to you from Austin, Texas on this bright and sunny day, it's Color Commentary, and we are Michael Petchek.
And Adrian Gonzalez.
And today we're joined by Alex Ullman of GatheringMagic.com. How are you doing today, Alex?
Doing all right. Hopefully my audio is better this time.
Yeah, the Zencastr service should help us out a little bit, so we don't have a repeat of last time's unfortunate audio.
Fingers crossed for that.
Yeah. I mean,
it was listenable, guys. Come on.
It was barely listenable.
You could have listened to it, though.
Yes.
That is technically correct. The best form of correct.
Exactly.
So, let's just get into things here, because I don't want to talk about F&M. I did terribly, and I want to move past it.
I do want to throw out real fast, though. We don't talk about mics. I have an F&M curse where I'll go 3-0. I'll be the only undefeated. I'll get a pair down for round 4, and I'll lose. The curse struck again on Friday. That being said, Nick's an excellent player, so happy to lose to him. But, you know, it feels bad, man.
This is like the 4th or 5th time it's happened.
Yes, I was playing Affinity, and it was the mirror, and it was one of those games where, you know, pretty stable boards. He combo killed me game 1. Game 2, I was stuck on one land, and he ancient grudged it. But I had done that earlier in the tournament to another Affinity player, so kind of hard to really be salty about it.
Yeah, you got to fling someone out while they had a lethal fling on the stack, didn't you?
Yes, I killed someone in response to their fling, and that was pretty sweet. And the next game, I blew up his lands with an ancient grudge. So, you know, the pendulum swings very wide for Affinity.
Are you still running Gear Seeker Serpent main?
I am. I'm playing 3, but I think that's too many. I'm probably going to go down to 2. Or I even like the lists that are only running 1. Like, it's very, very good when you play it, but they can get a little clogged in your hand because you can't really deploy multiples of them in one turn.
Yeah, that makes sense, but I'm happy to see that card, you know, I'm happy to see Kaladesh and that card specifically starting to make headway into the 5.0 decks online, because normally it takes a couple days for a new set to kind of penetrate the format, but Gear Seeker Serpent, it like almost the first day it showed up in a list, so that was really exciting.
I mean, it has affinity for artifacts. I am still I was baffled when I saw that spoiled. I was just like, they really brought it back?
Well,
because I had been joking like, oh, maybe they'll bring back affinity, and no, they just did.
They brought back a ton of mechanics in Kaladesh. They just didn't name them. You know,
yeah.
Rush Me has give your first spell of return Cascade.
Yeah.
What is it? Inventor's Fair has Metalcraft.
Has Metalcraft. And that white 1-drop that's seeing all that play in the red-white vehicles thing. Toolcraft Exemplar.
Also has Metalcraft.
Yep. I kind of wish they brought Metalcraft back in full, but that's just me. All right, so let's get into. We've got a deck tech, and this is a list that you posted on Twitter, Alex, and I've been jamming it, and it seems really fun and good, and it's got more stuff from Kaladesh in it.
Exactly.
Yeah, so anyone who follows me for the past 6 months or so on social media knows that I'm a big fan of core Skyfisher white aggressive decks, and I was playing them a lot before Eternal Masters got on Magic Online, because I really love the interaction of Thraben Inspector, which is the 1/2 for white with Investigate, so it comes with a clue token, and core Skyfisher, you know, just gives you tons of value for not much setup. But when Drake hit, the deck was just too slow. It was a very grindy, aggressive deck, you know, kind of something you would call mid-range aggro, but it just had problems punching through and adjusting to the new metagame. So I had something absurd, like a 72% win rate with the deck on Magic Online leagues, and I ended up hanging it up. And when Kaladesh came out, I was really excited for the opportunity to try a new top end. The old top end for the deck was Razor Golem, which, you know, it's the white cousin of Spire Golem, so it's 6 generic mana for a 3/4 vigilance with affinity for planes. So you could play it on turn 3, you could play 2 on turn 4, it was great. But, you know, 3/4 vigilance doesn't match up well with the format. What does match up well, apparently, is Renegade Freighter, which is a new one of those, which is a vehicle. For 3 mana, it's an artifact vehicle with crew cost of 2. And that seems right in the sweet spot of where you want to be with vehicles, because you don't want to run too many 1-drops with 1 power, because they're kind of mediocre or bad in the mid to late game. But Pauper has so many 2-drops that, or rather creatures with 2 power or 2 toughness, that 2 power is fine on turn 7, 8, 9. It's not ideal, but it's far from, well, I just lost the game. And what's really great about Freighter is that it's a 4/3, but when it attacks, it gets +1/+1 in trample. So it's actually a 5/4. And that's really, really good. Because the only thing that blocks it and lives, besides, Ulamog's Crusher, which is kind of on the fringes of the metagame, is, that 1 copy of Gearseeker Serpent that Affinity runs these days. So, it's just this really great aggressive top end for any kind of aggro deck that has trouble closing out the games. So, I was talking with Jason Sirichoke, Jay Siri on Twitter, and a bunch of other people, you guys also, and ended up settling on this list, which is kind of a very low-to-the-ground aggressive deck that tops on Renegade Freighter. So, you have 18 planes, 4 Elite Vanguard, 4 Thraben Inspector, 3 Acacian Javelineers, 2 Sunlance, 4 Journey to Nowhere, 4 Skyfisher, Core Skyfisher, 4 Squadron Hawk, 4 Loyal Cathar, 4 Bone Splitter, and 3 Renegade Freighter. But the thing that sets this apart for some of the other monetized version of White Weenie we see running around are the next 6 cards. Renegade Freighter is incredibly vulnerable to Lightning Bolt. It has 3 toughness, and Lightning Bolt is probably the most played removal spell in the format. So I run 2 copies of Veteran Armor and 4 Benevolent Bodyguard, which make this deck very resilient to removal. And what it does is that as soon as you turn your Renegade Freighter into a creature, it has 4 toughness. There's no moment where it can be Lightning Bolted for value. And so...
I think the only 4 damage instant burn spell that can target a creature is Fire Blast?
Galvanic Blast.
Galv Blast, yep.
And there's also Grasp of Darkness, which is black, target creature gets -4/-4, which we're seeing more of. But that's one of the reasons why Benevolent Bodyguard is so good, is because A, it provides a body, and B, it kind of can just sit on the board. So it demands a removal spell, so no matter what, it's going to eat a removal spell. Whether that's a spell pointed at it or at another valuable creature, that's what it comes right down to. I've had some success in the league with this. I had a 4-1 run where I lost to Delver, but I beat Burn, Mono Black Control, Blue Black Delver, and Elves. And to be fair, I consider Elves a very bad matchup, but I don't mean to be insulting, but my opponent wasn't that good either. They ended up siding into 62 cards at one point and kept a 1-lander, and it was not good. I'll leave it at that.
Oof. Yeah.
And then in my next...
Siding up just doesn't work well when that deck already runs, 13 to 15 lands?
Yeah, I think it might have been a mistake.
Yeah.
And then I also ended up so I went 4-1, and then I also ended up beating up on a white, basically the mirror, only they were running Monotithe and the other version, and what ended up happening is I played around Monotithe the entire match, and it worked. So that's another thing I think this deck gets value out of, is that because it doesn't run Monotithe, people have to respect that you might have it.
Mm-hmm.
And because the more successful version, the one that's running around right now, also runs not only Monotithe, it doesn't run Renegade Freighter. Instead, it runs a copy of Skyskiff as its top-end vehicle. You can really get people by, forcing them to wait an extra turn. The sideboard is kind of thrown together. It's another Sunlance. It's a Divine Offering, which is 1 and a white. Destroy target artifact, gain life equal to its mana cost. So, I'll gain 6 or I'll gain 7.
Yeah, I was going to say Mirror Enforcer seems like prime target for this.
There's 2 copies of Lone Missionary, 3 Standard Bearer, 3 Suture Priest, 2 Celestial Flare, 2 Unmake, and a copy of Prismatic Strands. Sideboard is fine at best. Needs some work, but I'm happy with it now. Chances are, because of how many vehicles we're seeing, I'd probably find home for a couple copies of Fragmentize over Divine Offering and some other spells. But really, if you're looking for something that isn't blue and you want to play with some new cards, I really can't recommend this deck highly enough. It's a lot of fun. It has some really sweet interactions, like you can top deck Elite Vanguard, immediately attack with Renegade Freighter, or you can, accrue Renegade Freighter and then hand it to Bone Splitters, so it attacks as a 9/4 Trampler. I mean,
yeah. So I mean, people have been questioning whether it's like people locally have been questioning like whether it's actually as good as it looks on paper, and I keep telling people like it is kind of just a free reckless charge every turn.
People keep losing a mic, so.
I mean, once you get it online, it's very hard to deal with. Like, it just bashes in for a bunch of damage and it just runs away with games. But I keep telling people like it's a reckless charge that grants trample every turn because you can functionally give things haste.
Yeah, it changes the way matchups have to be played. So many of the decks out there, rather during the transition from Eldritch Moon season to Kaladesh season, relied on sorcery speed removal. We see Flame Slash, we see Chainer's Edict, we see Evankar's Justice, we see all this stuff that is sorcery speed, and there's a reason why. Those are all very powerful cards. But what Renegade Freighter and to a lesser extent Sky Skiff do is they sit there, and then any top deck suddenly becomes something you have to deal with. So I can say that, I've had my entire army wiped out, and I was facing down a lethal attack from Gurmag Angler. They had left their Angler back. I had a train, 2 Bone Splitters, and enough mana. I top-decked Benevolent Bodyguard, equipped it, tapped it to crew the vehicle, gave my creature protection, and they snap conceded before I could even attack. And, I think Benevolent Bodyguard's really the unsung hero of this deck. Yeah, Freighter is really good, but anyone who plays against it, I play exclusively on Magic Online for Pauper, but the first time I crewed it and attacked, I could almost sense my opponent's shoulders just sinking as they realized exactly what was happening. It really... I think the best aggro deck that we haven't found yet is the one that best uses vehicles. I really think Renegade Freighter is a format-changing card, and we'd probably hear more about it if not for Peregrine Drake, but we'll get to that.
Yeah, I think like vehicles are like, I was kind of lukewarm on them, and then Adrian and I did a pre-release together, and I realized very quickly, it helped that I opened a copy of Sky Sovereign, but like I realized very quickly how absurdly powerful they are. Like just not being able to interact with them on your turn in a meaningful way a lot of the time is just really, really strong.
I raised your Sky Sovereign with my pre-release, which included Noxious Gearhulk, Cataclysmic Gearhulk, and Smuggler's Copter.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, just the Copter alone, we got beat bad by a Copter in our 2-headed giant. Just gave them so many cards.
Yeah, it's absurd that they put that as a when it attacks trigger, not when it deals damage.
And when it blocks.
And when it blocks as well. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that it doesn't have to connect to have like an Ophidian style effect is just so good.
Well, and the results in the Pro Tour aren't like 4 of the decks in the top 8 copter decks. So
Yeah.
vehicles are very strong across the board.
And I
Yes,
definitely think like this is better than when they introduced equipment, because for anyone who's playing during Mirrodin, I'm sure we remember Skull Clamp and the mistake of an era. Like
Well,
that card was absolutely absurd.
I think there's a better way to talk about this. You know, you look at this deck that we're talking about, the vehicle white deck, and what you see is Bone Splitter, which is 1 generic mana for, you know, an equipment. The equip cost is 1, and it gets +1 +2 +0. Look at Kaladesh. You know, you have another equipment out there that gives equipped creature +2 +0 called Torch Gauntlet, but it costs 2 to cast and 2 to equip. So that kind of tells you, like, okay, they figured it out. They figured out that they really screwed up with equipment originally. You know, because, like, let's put it this way. Bone Splitter's really good, but it's hardly absurdly broken. It's just very good.
Yeah.
So
and
good that
that's
they
what I
had
think these vehicles are, is they're just, the ones that are Pauper legal at least, are just all very good with the exception of Aradara Express, but they're all just good. None of them feel like they're completely unanswerable threats, or, you know, there's no way to deal with this if Drake gets banned. Like,
Yeah.
they just all feel really solid.
And I think that's the other really nice thing, is that because of where they fall, they're very, very easy to deal with. You know, we talked about Fragmentize. They handle it. Natural State handles the 2 vehicles that get played. Not Natural State. What's the...
Oh,
I mean, Natural State does, but Natural State's actually from Avacyn Restored, which is 2 and a green.
oh God.
Destroy
no,
target
no, no,
artifact.
no. I know the one you're talking about. It's not Natural Order. I forget
Natural
what it is.
End. It's Natural End.
Is it?
Yeah, Natural End is destroy target artifact or enchantment. You gain 3 life. It's kind of like Appetite for the Unnatural, except better. And then Natural State is the one that's destroy target artifact or enchantment with converted mana cost 3 or less.
Yes, and that one seems to be quite good, especially because, you know, against Affinity, sure, you can't hit their big things, but it sure is a 1 mana instant speed Stone Rain on turn 1.
Gotta love instant speed Stone Rains. Let's not forget that Ancient Grudge also sees a ton of play and is very good against vehicles. You know, it's another reason why I love Benevolent Bodyguard, because if you manage to crew a vehicle, you can give it protection. So vehicles are that really sweet spot where they're really good, but there are existing answers.
Yeah, and I don't think any of them. Yeah, again, like, you know, every so often we get the cards that are good but are obviously broken. Like Treasure Cruise was pretty much immediately clear was not healthy for the format at all. But with this one, it's kind of like, okay, I don't think these will ever need to even be discussed being banned. I'm sure they will be, because if they take off, they will be, you know, someone will want to ban them. But by and large, like, they're just very fair and good cards.
Siege Rhino-esque, maybe.
No. You got to remember, Siege Rhino in our format is Bleak Coven Vampires.
God, I hated that analogy.
Sure.
But Alex, it ETBs and it drains them. That's exactly the same thing as Siege Rhino.
Man, Mike is on full troll mode today.
You cannot see me, but I'm doing that thing where I pinch the bridge of my nose and close my eyes.
I will say I do really love Bleak Coven Vampires, but I was also in that same camp when the first, what was it, the Mardu kitty lists
Yeah.
When they first showed up and people were like, "Oh, it's Popper Siege Rhino," I was just like, it's kind of. I guess I can see the comparison, but not really.
I mean, if you really want to talk about what actual Pauper Siege Rhino is, it's probably Grey Merchant of Asphodel because it had
Yep.
a similar effect. But we've gone off on enough tangents about cards that are not common today between Smuggler's Copter and Siege Rhino.
I know.
I mean, the Pro Tour has been going on, so I've been watching a lot of that coverage and really enjoying it. This has actually been a really good Pro Tour.
Not only that, the coverage has been fantastic. But we're not going on
Yeah.
this tangent today. We have other tangents to go on.
All right,
So many tangents.
so let Adrian, you want to take us into the maybe board?
Well, actually, real quick, Alex, do you mind giving us do you have a quick price breakdown for how much your deck might cost someone who would just want to buy all these pieces up on Moto?
No.
Fair.
Unfortunately, like, I will say this. I'm not, I think I said this last time, I'm not as sensitive to what decks cost on Magic Online because part of the reason I write is so I can support my Magic habit, and so I'm able to do that. But what I will say is this, is that if you like Pauper, every time a new large set comes out on Magic Online, so Shadows of Innistrad, Kaladesh, when Amonkhet comes out, I believe they'll continue this, the Deck Builder's Essentials in the Magic Online store each come with 2 of every common in Standard, I believe. And they're $5 a piece. So, you can get, for $10, a playset of every common in the new Standard environment. They don't do it for small sets, so they didn't do it for Eldritch Moon. They probably won't do it for Aether Revolt. But if you like playing Pauper on Magic Online, and then you're like me and you're like, I don't want to wait, I just want to have all the cards right now, it is incredibly worth it if you do have $10 to spare. And that's $10 twice or 3 times a year, and you will get every potentially playable Pauper card in perpetuity, as long as they continue this rollout.
And I think that's really a good suggestion, because I kind of do the same thing with paper. Like, every time a new set comes out, I go through the commons, I pick out what I want, and I throw together an order on TCG Player or somewhere like that, and, get everything I need out of the new set just in one bulk buy. I did quickly check on some of the prices in this. The only expensive parts to this deck are sideboard cards. Standard bearers are like $2-3 a pop, and same for prismatic strands. But apart from that, the rest of the deck probably costs less than those. Most of these are, 2 to 5 cent cards.
Yeah,
So
I can't imagine this deck costing more than 10 tickets on Magic Online, with a bulk
No,
of that being the main deck specifically.
It is dirt cheap, and in paper, the only thing here that's expensive are the journeys and the unmakes, and those are like $1 or $2 a piece. I think this is. I can't give you an absolute number from like a price analyzer, but I think this is just like a slam dunk. If you like playing white aggro, if you want to play with a new card from Kaladesh, just go for it.
And
Awesome.
the one thing that's really nice about this deck is it's not. I won't lie. I don't think this deck is going to 5-0 very often. I think it's very tough for any deck without any kind of real disruption to 5-0 these days, unless you're very lucky. Sometimes you're going to flip a coin, it's going to come up heads 10 times. You're going to win every die roll, and you're going to just get, 10 out of 15 really sweet draws and just overwhelm your opponent. But you can't rely on that. Now, if you're okay going 3-2, 4-1, maybe occasionally 5-0, this is a deck for you. You can go and sustain victories for a decent length of time with this. I mean, that's when I ran white before, I never went 5-0. But there were only 2 leagues out of the 10 I ran it in where I didn't go 4-1. One of them I went 2-3, one of them I went 3-2. So that's the kind of consistency I like in a deck.
That
Right.
that and also I think is something worth mentioning is a lot of these are also like just kind of format staples. Like your Journey to Nowheres are gonna see play in pretty much any white deck. Like
Skyfisher.
the Skyfisher, like most of the board stuff is all stuff that sees crossplay in other white decks.
Yep.
So
I play Standard Bearer and Affinity. It's a great card, so I can attest to that.
yeah, I think like this reads to me as just like an absolute slam dunk of a deck if you want to try something new and you're itching to try out Kaladesh cards.
Awesome. Well, with that, I will take us to the maybe board. Our card today is Jilt. It is an instant for blue and 1 with a kicker of 1 and a red, so conceivably 4 mana total. Return target creature to its owner's hand. If you paid the kicker cost, Jilt deals 2 damage to another target creature. And the art is Gerard Jilting Yawgmoth.
Yeah, it's got gorgeous Therese Nielsen art. But going into this card, so again, we're in the maybe board, which means we're playing gold cards because that's where a lot of these exist.
It's technically a gold card because although it is you could just cast it for blue, but to get the full value, you would need to kick it.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to be casting an overpriced unsummon.
Now, and Alex mentioned this earlier. This is sweet with Archaeomancer because this card in Archaeomancer is infinite shocks.
Yep.
Yeah. So, breaking the rule of talking about just commons, this is a card where, go to Battle for Zendikar, look at Brutal Expulsion. 2 blue-red for a devoid instant. Choose one or both. Return target spell or creature to its owner's hand, or Brutal Expulsion deals 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that permanent would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So, 2 blue-red for, Remand or Shock. Well, Remand is not really a pauper level card. It's a little higher for that. But more or less, Brutal Expulsion is, Jilt is about 75 to 80% of Brutal Expulsion, and it's a common. Jilt is just one of these super flexible cards. In the early game, it can return a Gurmag Angler and help you stabilize the board. In the mid-game, it can pick off 2 threats. We talked about with Archaeomancer, you can target Archaeomancer with the blue half of Jilt, shock something, a creature with the red half of Jilt, and do it over and over again. It's just a really... There's a lot of moving pieces to this card, and, Unsummon is your standard blue bounce spell for blue, return target creature to its owner's hand as an instant. It's different than Boomerang, which is blue-blue for return target permanent to its owner's hand. But this is just, Pauper is largely played with creatures, and this is just a nice way to gain a little bit of value in one card. Now, that being said, it is a little slow, it is a little expensive, but if the format slows down a little bit, to a point where 2-for-1s get better. Right now we're kind of in a Muldrifter world, and if we can play other 2-for-1s, well, things just get that much better.
Yeah, I mean, so you were the one who actually suggested this right before we sat down to record, and the first thing that I thought of when seeing this is Electrolyze. And yes, this isn't cantrip, but the ability to just have a built-in 2-for-1 is pretty strong in our format. Like, we don't have many just kind of guaranteed 2-for-1s, and that alone makes this very, very convincing. It also makes, as soon as your opponent sees it, it makes combat math a little hellish for them. Because, you're swinging in with some stuff, and you could shock one of their things to death, or at least to make it trade. You could bounce another blocker. There's so many things that you could do with this, and I just love that it's an instant as well, because, hoo boy, if this saw print today, this is a sorcery effect now.
At common, for sure. I think that's the thing. Whenever I'm building a blue tempo-based deck, or any kind of blue deck, I get to a point where I have a couple flex slots, and this is always on the short list if I'm blue-red for, will this card work? And a lot of times it's, I would not mind a Jilt. Now, sure, sometimes it's going to be dead. This card looks really bad against elves, but sometimes it's going to be the card that wins you the game. Sometimes it's just going to be a nice tool in your tool belt, and sometimes it's going to do nothing. But again, when you take the long view of how is this card going to serve me over the length of a season or over the length of a format, it's really easy to say, well, I went 5-0 and Jilt was terrible, so I'm never running it again. But what happens those times you go 4-1, 3-2, or Pauper has a problem, at least online, with a longitudinal view of the health of the format and what cards are good. Because we get this kind of very condensed view of only 5-0 deck lists and only a certain number, what we see are decks that are somewhat optimized to go 5-0.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just seems like a really solid card, and I don't know, like, yes, it's an overcosted unsummon on face value, but just you're paying that one extra basically to have the opportunity later to make this so much better than unsummon.
Yeah.
So, and really the deck that I can think of that would want to play this would be the Drake decks, right? This is a little too slow for the Kiln Fiend style decks. And I can't really think of another blue-red deck off the top of my head that's in the same sort of control shell. So could you recommend this as a one-of in Drake deck?
I could not in good conscience, actually. Drake is this really... should we just start talking about the next topic, which is the state of the metagame? Because,
yes. Yeah, we can transition.
Look at that segue. Look at that segue.
There we go.
Blue-red Drake is... It's this kind of unique deck in Pauper. In that, when Cloud of Fairies was legal and Esper combo, it was a 100% pure combo deck. It needed to dedicate so many spots to achieving the combo. It needed Sunscape Familiar, it needed Nightscape Familiar, it needed Cloud of Fairies, it needed Flicker, it needed Sage's Road Denizen, it needed pieces to it needed all these things to move. And that's because Cloud of Fairies only untapped 2 lands, and you needed to generate extra mana. I was naive. I thought the fact that Peregrine Drink cost 5 would make it worse. I was really, really wrong.
We literally said the exact same thing on the podcast. We were just like, it's 5 mana. It'll take a while to get there. Don't worry about it. We were so wrong.
And this is why, because you get to shave the number of slots dedicated to the combo.
Yeah.
What used to take what used to take 30 to 32 slots of a deck, you can now achieve in between 10 and 12.
Yeah.
That gives you way more space. And what's ended up happening is Drake has taken the role of the win condition in blue-red control decks, or blue-based control decks, more specifically, that are not Dimir teachings. And so what ends up happening is we've reverted to a place where the format has a best deck. I think it's safe to say the best deck is It Drake. And Is It Drake operates as a tap-out control deck until it needs to win. And then it turns the corner into combo mode. And what I mean by tap-out control is that every turn it seeks to use all its mana to develop its board position and board state. So that could be turn 1, Ponder, Preordain, or Tap Land. Turn 2, Is It Boiler Works? Turn 3, Seagate Oracle. Turn 4, Deal with Your Threat. Turn 5, Deal with Your Threat again. And then when you get to turn 7, it's Peregrine Drake with Counterspell backup to start the combo. And that's really what it is. Now, can it go off on turn 5? Yes, it can. And for those of you who don't know, you need Peregrine Drake, Archaeomancer or Mnemonic Wall, and Ghostly Flicker. What happens is you have you have, we'll just call it Archaeomancer and Peregrine Drake in play. You target both with Ghostly Flicker. They leave play and come back into play at the same time. You tap and untap all your lands, or 5 of them. You get that Ghostly Flicker, and you do this over and over and over again until you either have enough mana that you get to start cycling Ghostly Flicker through Muldrifter and Archaeomancer, or Seagate Oracle and Archaeomancer to find, lightning bolts to point at your opponent's head, or more Drakes to cast, or Muldrifters to cast and draw cards. And eventually, you just can win on the spot if you have enough patience to generate enough mana and lightning bolt your opponent to death, or compulsive research them to death, or if you're running rolling thunder them to death.
Yeah, it's just a very. I was just thinking while you were talking, would this deck be slightly more fair if Peregrine Drake was, a 3-drop? Let's ignore body for now, but just if it was
search.
Yeah, if it was only untapping 3 lands, I feel like at that point it becomes a little bit less unfair, but not fully it's not fully like a fair, easy to deal with combo deck.
I honestly don't know. I mean, the truth of the matter is that the free mechanic, Mark Rosewater has said, it's the one mechanic you can't really work with because making the cards more expensive make them better.
Right, look at Palinchron. That might not be a good example because Palinchron interacts with itself, but just being able to untap 7 lands is, huge. And it's a great cube card.
Look at Time Spiral. Anything where you can cheat the mana cost of cards is really, really good. So this is an engine, and it's a win condition, all in one.
Yeah, and so you track all these numbers, and you were saying, I think you told me the other day that it was like 23% of last season was Drake over the course of the season?
So over the course of Eldritch Moon season, which ran from July 29th until, let me actually pull up the exact date, October 4th. So we're talking a significant amount of time. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, about 10 weeks. Peregrine Drake decks were about 23% of the metagame. Out of the 495 decks that went 5-0 in that time span that were recorded, 115 were Peregrine Drake decks.
Oh my god. That actually, usually percentages feel worse, but in this case that number comparison made it feel a little bit worse to me.
Yeah, and for comparison, and that's all Peregrine Drake decks. The next best is Delver, which had 12.73%, or only 63 decks. So almost half. And Delver is, probably, when Delver isn't clearly your second best deck, there might be something wrong with the format.
Yeah. I've touched on this before, it's the problem is kind of less that it's taking up 23% of the meta, because people love to harp on the fact that, the meta percentage isn't indicative of it being unhealthy, blah, blah, blah. But the main thing is that 23% is that stake in the meta came from somewhere else. And, what we're kind of seeing is people are being forced into running really aggressive, low to the ground decks, and mid-range and control have kind of died off a little bit.
We're becoming modern, basically.
Well, let's talk about some numbers. So the last season before Peregrine Drake was Shadows over Innistrad season, and that ran for about 9 weeks. Now, Delver was utterly dominant in that season. It was about 1/5 of the decks. A little more than 1/5 of all the decks were Delver. Straight up mono blue Delver. Mm-hmm. The next best deck was Stompy, which was about 15.59%. And then things kind of tailed off after that. Those two were clearly far and away the best decks. For example, Affinity was 6.9% of the metagame at that time. Mono Black Control was 8.1. Jeskai Midrange, Jeskai Kitty was 4.66, 4.7%. So, it wasn't exactly a perfect metagame, but the decks kind of existed in clusters. And so while Delver and Stompy were kind of A1, there was a much bigger tier 2. And also, Shadows of Innistrad was hot on the heels of the first season without Cloud of Fairies. So going back to Oath of the Gatewatch, the best deck there, I believe, was also Delver. I gotta pull up my spreadsheet because... Yeah, but back then, Delver was only 14% of the metagame. Stompy was 9.5, Tron was 8.2, Mono Black was 6.5. So things kind of weren't perfect, but they, it's kind of like the Tarkir timeline. Oh man, these warlords are really terrible. Let's go back in time and fix, and you just don't fix anything. Everything gets much, much worse for everyone.
Things are worse, but different.
Yeah. So Eternal Masters was the first season where Drake was legal. And it was 29, almost 29% of the metagame for all of Eternal Masters. Second place then was Affinity at just over 10.5%. Delver was at 8.5% about. Stompy was at 5.3. So Eternal Masters kind of was the big thing that shook everything to its core. Going to Eldritch Moon, Blue Red Drake is 17.17% of the metagame, but Drake overall is 23. And what you see is Delver's at 12.73, Affinity is 11.11, Stompy is almost 11%. And so you really have this kind of like tier A1 metagame, which is Drake decks. And then you have Affinity, Delver, and Stompy kind of vying for second place. And then there's everything else. And so when that started, I went back to the first day Eternal Masters was legal, which was June 15th. And every day since then, I've totaled the number of decks, the number of Drake decks, against the number of Delver, Affinity, and Stompy decks. So not counting yesterday, which is October 15th, because I haven't entered those statistics yet, Drake has accounted for 26.61% of every undefeated deck. So, out of 947 decks, that's 252.
Okay.
It's a lot of decks.
Yeah, that is not speaking greatly for the health of the format. Although we were chatting about this before the show. There's a weird side effect that it seems like a lot of the there's been a lot of like weird brews, kind of like people have been trying out some very interesting lists in an attempt to combat this weird meta.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of this weird, like, while Drake might not be healthy for the format, in the end, it might actually have forced people to, get out of their comfort zone and try something new, and we might have found some new interesting things to do in this format.
Yeah.
So,
I think what we're seeing now is a real shift. And so I can say this, both Affinity and Delver have 101 decks in that same time span. Stompy has 83, so that's 10.67% for Delver and Affinity, Stompy at 8.76%. So what we're really seeing is the old best decks aren't great anymore. And I think this is a flaw in the data that we receive, is that we don't know what's going on underneath the surface. What we're seeing is the body of the duck, but we don't see what's going on with its webbed feet underneath. And what it looks like is that the fundamental turn of Pauper has really shifted from turn somewhere between 4 and 5 to somewhere between turn 3 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start to see this in some of the choices that decks are making. Stephen Murray, Scottish national champion, he has innovated on Delver by cutting down to 16 or 15 lands, cutting Spire Golem entirely for Phantasmal Bear. Another turn 1 threat, something that can attack really reasonably well, turns into Ninja. You know, it doesn't have as much synergy with Bone Splitter, but sacrifices must be made. You see, there's a player out there who's doing blue-black Delver, and instead of doing just Delver and Gurmag Angler, they're all, I think it's Lazoo, Lazoo, or Zoo. That person's also running Phantasmal Bear. You're seeing the mono blacklist you guys talked about last week, which is 14 land and just infinite 1-drops that tops off on Renegade Freighter. And we're also seeing the old endgames wither and die. And Mono Black Control is a deck near and dear to my heart, but it's not going to be able to operate the same way anymore, where it kind of wants to build out a board presence and then start chaining Grey Merchants of Asphodel back to back to back to kind of close out the game. Because that's just, it's not good enough anymore. When Drake can beat you from no matter your life total, you know, sure, it might take a little longer if you're at 30 life than if you're at 20 life. But really, at that point, you're just not, you're playing to not lose. You're not playing to win. And so what you're starting to see is a shift in the way decks are built and the approach to the game that is trying to shift everything earlier on the curve. We talked a little bit about how good Renegade Freighter is because people are still running sorcery speed removal. Well, what happens when that changes and people start catching on that they should be running Lightning Bolt, Ghastly Demise, Vendetta, Scred? I'm missing a whole bunch of 1-mana instant speed removal spells like Death Rattle and all these other spells that are really, really good. You know, what about Dead Gone? It also does well. But you also have to be able to kill Drake or disrupt Drake at the same time that you're basically trying to kill them. Control decks have to change their mindset to the point where, okay, not only do I need to be able to answer their threats, I need to close out the game. You know, it's popular to say, oh, you know, Dimir Teachings has a good matchup with with Peregrine Drake. Does it? I mean, to me...
Not really.
To me, it's just like, okay, if you had a good matchup and you're a good control deck, why aren't you dominating the metagame? You know, Pauper might not be fully explored, but it's relatively well known. You know, you might not know every nook and cranny, but, you know, Echoing Decay might be okay against Stompy, but it's going to be really good against tokens and pretty good against red deck wins. Why is this control deck, this pure control deck, not at the top of the format? And I'm not trying to say it's bad, but what I do think is that when you minimize your win conditions in this format, you're really doing yourself a disservice. Because sometimes you're just going to need to turn 2 Angler, turn sideways 4 times to win.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's definitely like we're being forced into a place where like decks that wouldn't usually run sort of a lot of stuff at the low end of the curve are kind of having to move up their game plan, and it's resulting in, frankly, what I think is some interesting things. I think the cost we paid for it was too high, but you know, we're definitely seeing like innovation in terms of like, I'm going to try this thing out that is weird and new, and maybe it'll work.
I agree. What I worry about is, like, I love Pauper, and I want it to continue to develop and decks to continue to evolve and change. And I think having a Drake-like event to shake up the metagame isn't bad. But what is bad is when it starts to choke out colors, entire colors of Magic. Right now, if you're not running blue or red, you are really, really far behind. Green is only succeeding because of Rancor. I mean, when you look at a green deck, it's Rancor based. And that's fine, you know, Stompy is a good deck. But even in the past, Tron, like traditional Tron, is nowhere to be seen. But even then, it was nominally a green deck. It had Fangren Marauder, it had Ancient Stirrings. You were seeing other cards see play. White is almost completely absent from the metagame. Black, aside from Gurmag Angler, almost completely absent from the metagame. So I don't think it's bad that we're seeing a shift in the metagame. But if it persists to the point where we're still not seeing anything that's not blue or red in the most played decks, you know, then I think we might need to take a look and be like, oh, okay, is this really healthy? And maybe that means a ban needs to happen. You know, I don't think it's any secret that I'm of the mindset that Peregrine Drake should be banned, but I'm also not of the mindset of, well, I'm just going to stop playing Pauper because I don't like this. I'm going to take my ball and go home. I do want to try and attack Drake. And so how do you do that? You have to disrupt the combo. And that means taking out Archaeomancer and Drake with Ghostly Flicker on the stack, dealing with Ghostly Flicker while it's not on the stack. Or while it's on the stack.
Yeah, or in the graveyard. I mean, either one of those angles can help stave off the Drake win.
Yeah.
So I'm actually curious. I just kind of want to go off on a side tangent and pick your brain because so the banned and restricted announcement, the most recent one, when it was coming up, I was talking with some people and I said that my outside bet was maybe Wizards just finally says, all right, we're pulling the plug on the free spells and Pauper, and maybe we also see Snap leave the format.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious if you think that is at all possible, because I was thinking just maybe this is just like, you know, they just nip it in the bud to avoid it being a problem in the future potentially. And I promise this isn't just me being salty about Drake or Delver.
So when someone casts Snap against me, I'm annoyed. When someone casts Peregrine Drake against me or casts Cloud of Fairies against me in the past, I was dejected. There's a big difference, and part of that is the creatures in like if let's take the white deck for example. If they're casting Snap against you, chances are they're spending, I'm doing air quotes, 2 mana to take care of a 1 mana threat.
Yeah.
You're coming out ahead. If they do it against a 2 mana threat, you're coming out even. And then what ends up happening is they had to spend Snap and a counter spell to deal with the threat that was on the board.
Okay. So the fact that they spent 2 mana and 2 cards, in your mind, that's not the end of the world.
I think that because there are so many creatures with strong enter the battlefield abilities, Snap is probably worse in aggressive decks than Vapor Snag.
Okay.
I think that, you know, if they ban Snap, you're not going to be... I'm not going to be upset. I'm not going to be, oh, how could you take that card away? It was... But I don't think it's as offensive as some other cards that existed in other formats or have existed in Pauper in the past. I think that, you know, what will end up happening is we might see some number of Snapback see play. And for those of you who don't know what that card is, it's
yeah. I remember this one.
It's from Time Spiral. It's 1 blue for an unsummon, but I want to make sure I'm getting this right.
I think it's just exile a blue card.
Yeah, you can exile a blue card from your hand to bounce a creature. So that's not a bad card.
It's like a very, very, very bad force of will, but it's still a free spell that, yeah, you're 2-for-1ing yourself, but you can play it with no untapped lands.
Yeah. So I think that is a card that could see play, and frankly, I honestly I don't know why it hasn't. Now that I'm looking at it, seems pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is that Snap is also technically quote unquote free, and doesn't 2-for-1 you, but.
Yeah, but think of the salt equity you could get when you tap out, and then someone just slams their angler, and you go, snap back, and they just they're in a rage, and they take a hammer to their computer, and they smash it, they disconnect, and you win. Think of that equity.
Well,
You
I mean,
ruined
it's also
someone's
kinda,
day.
it's also kind of in the delve spot of or not delve, daze.
Yeah.
Where it's just kind of like every so often you just get to get someone when they're sure that you don't have an answer, and there's some perhaps perverse joy in knowing that you got them.
What, you mean when someone decides to sacrifice all their artifacts to fling an ATOG at you, and then you actually just casually respond by sacrificing all your artifacts and flinging them?
Hey, achievement unlocked. That's all I'm gonna say.
So actually, Adrian, I do want to point out, you said that was the first at F&M. You said that was the first time you've ever done that.
Yeah, it's never happened before. I don't know why. It seems like a scenario that would come up kind of often in the mirror, but yeah, it's the first time I've ever actually done it.
Yeah, no, that because you were saying before the match, you were just like, this is a miserable mirror, and then halfway through, I look over and you're getting to do some nonsense.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I will say I do think Affinity is a pretty miserable mirror. It basically comes down to who, in that game, who drew ATOG Fling, and then in sideboard games, it's who draws Ancient Grudge.
Why aren't you running Gorilla Shaman?
I used to be the only Affinity player, and now there are more. I will be more prepared next time.
Yeah, didn't we have 3 people playing Affinity?
Yeah, I was a little shocked. Normally it's just me.
We also had this is the second week we had no Drake players, which is soothing, but it's also now our meta's weird. Now we can't tell new players, oh, just go to Goldfish, you'll see what the meta's like, and we had some weird stuff this past week. So we had 2 blue-black Tortured Existence decks, and I played against both of them.
Let me tell you, I love blue-black Tortured Existence. I think that deck is sweet. I like looping Muldrifter with Grave Scrabbler, but that deck is way too grindy for the current metagame, at least online. With that being said, if you want to approach Pauper online, you need to know Drake is a thing. You cannot just decide to ignore it. You can say, you know what, I'm willing to lose that matchup to have better game against everything else, which I think is a reasonable choice to make. The white deck I talked about, I don't think it can beat Drake, but I think it can beat everything else. So I'm willing to sacrifice, what's going to be something that I run into, I want to say twice every 3 leagues on average, for the sake of, I lost my train of thought, for the sake of enjoying myself, for lack of a better term.
I mean, also sometimes, the road to that 5-0 is just getting lucky on your matchups.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every so often there'll be stuff that shows up in the 5-0s where it's just how did this 5-0? I remember pretty early on into Drake being around, someone 5-0'd with Night Sky Mimic, the black-white hybrid deck, and they had no way of winning against Drake. They just didn't get paired against Drake.
They have to castigate Ghostly Flicker. That's how they have to win.
Yeah. But yeah, sometimes you just got to say, I'm willing to, kind of forfeit this matchup just so I can play a deck I enjoy.
And honestly, that's true in other formats as well. There's I can't remember where it is off the top of my head, but there's an article somewhere out there about how in Modern, Jund just can't beat Tron, so you might as well not even try and just make yourself better against the games that are a little closer.
Yeah, that is a legitimate thing that I think people underestimate in Pauper is the oh god, it is sacrificing matchups. You see it on the Reddit all the time of, well, I want to beat everything. If you want to have game against everything, play Delver, play Stompy, play Affinity. These are the decks that are established to have game against everything. And you know what? They still have terrible matchups. It's really hard for Delver to beat Elves. It's really hard for Stompy to beat Mono Black Control sometimes. It's very hard for Affinity to beat Turn 2 Gorilla Shaman. You have to be okay with these matchups. Like, you have to be okay with having bad matchups.
I mean, so another thing to think of, is do you want to run the deck that has, 50-50 against across the board, right? Like every matchup is basically, comes down to good play and a little bit of luck. Or do you want to play the deck that's like probably like 60-40 or 70-30 against most decks and then has one matchup that's just like a 10-90 where you're just like, I'm probably not going to win this, but the rest of my matches are locks. And I don't know, like I personally, like when I think about like the deck that kind of has game against everything prior to Drake, it was Jeskai Kitty, the Skyfisher deck.
Yeah.
And that was one of those ones where it was like it didn't really have any really bad matchups, but it also didn't have any where it was just like, oh yeah, I got this one. Like So I definitely I will fully admit I lean far more towards the decks where it's like, all right, I've got a couple of really good matchups, I've got a lot of good a couple of like really great ones, a lot of good ones, and then there's just like two games where it's like I'll show up, but I'm probably losing.
And I think that's reasonable. I think what isn't reasonable is trying to build your deck to beat everything. I think that, with that white deck, at some point you're going to have diminishing returns where you start shaving cards to make Drake a better matchup. Or, let's actually talk about a matchup that I think like Elves. I don't think that deck is very good against Elves, but I have a game plan against it, but I'm not willing to sacrifice my matchup against other things, especially in the sideboard, to try and make my matchup against Elves better. I'm okay losing to Elves if that happens, for example.
Yeah, I definitely think like for example, I've been jamming Stompy a lot, and I've noticed that deck is miserable against Affinity, to the point where Adrian and I played a couple weeks ago, and I blew up. Was it 4 or 5 of your lands?
It was
like,
a few.
Like pretty early on. Like I think it was a couple of natural states, and then like a couple, and then I want to say like
It was a Gleeful in there.
a conspired Gleeful. And even through that, it was just like, yep, nope, not getting there. He got the 4/4 online. I'm never attacking again. So
it was sweet.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to be said for just kind of cutting your losses and just being like, all right, I know I can't win this one. Let me just shore up my sideboard against all my other matchups to make those even better.
Yeah, and who knows? Maybe Wizards has taken the stance of we're only going to ban things in Pauper once a year. Maybe they think that Drake is not that bad for the metagame, although I think it's, considering the numbers I see, I actually think it's the former. I think they don't want to ban things more than once a year. And I can respect that. I really can. I may not agree with it, but I can respect it.
People always ask about like why Wizards doesn't pay more attention to the format. We're not the format that's moving sealed product for them. Like I show up at pre-releases, and I think that's almost exclusively, besides the times where I'm just like, I want to buy a cardboard lottery ticket. I think that's the only time I crack packs open, and or like drafts. But I definitely think that they probably don't have us super high on their radar, and for a good reason.
Yeah, and I think, that's another discussion of how to make Pauper more part of the business plan without sacrificing other resources. Because that's the thing. You can say, oh, all you have to do is ban it. I'm like, yeah, but that takes person hours to make sure that it's correctly banned in Magic Online. There's not a zero cost. Yeah, I understand that programming might be... I don't understand programming, and it might be something that takes an hour or half an hour, but then it's making sure that it didn't screw up everything else. And so,
I would just like to point out that for a while, Mitgo had a bug where, was it Relic Seeker from Origins? The promo one was glitched out and did a different thing than the regular one. So, from what I've heard, Magic Online is kind of a patchwork of about a decade worth of code that doesn't always interact nicely. So I think it is a very much a non-zero amount of time to make sure that works.
yeah, and it's taking someone away from coding the new set to do that. And yeah, it sucks for us, but I'm willing to say, okay, it's going to suck for a little while. Oh, but they can keep making Magic Online work, and they can keep making Magic cards, and I get to feed my addiction for the next, 5-6 years. I'm okay with that.
And I don't know. I definitely I kind of wish they'd ban Drake, but at the same time, I'm also, an adult who can handle, waiting 3 months for the next BNR. And I think, pretty good odds of it getting banned there. And we can kind of lay this to rest. I'm looking at the time, and we're a little over an hour. Alex, would you like to give whatever plugs you want for where we can find you, where your articles are, all that good stuff?
Sure thing. You can find my new articles on gatheringmagic.com. They usually go live every Tuesday. That is unless I have something special going on. Like when I have preview articles, they go up at various points of the week. You can find me on Twitter at nerdtothecore or facebook.com/nerdtothecore. And that is where you can find me. I also do news posts for gatheringmagic.com. So when someone wins an event, like in about 8-9 hours when the Pro Tour is over, I'll be writing an article about that too.
Yep. I believe, if I remember correctly, on Gathering Magic, if you can find one of Alex's articles and you click the word Pauper on it, that should show you all of his stuff for the format.
Yes, it will show you all the Pauper stuff and not who won Grand Prix Sao Paulo 5 years ago.
All right. Well, Adrian, you want to take us out on this episode?
Sure. That's all we have for today. Special thanks to Pat's Games for giving us a place to play a weekly popper, and special thanks to Elle for the use of his song Quantitative as our theme music. You can find that track and other great ones over on his SoundCloud under the name LLL. Please subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. We're also on iTunes, and if you just subscribe there, please leave us a review because it really helps us out. If you have an idea for a discussion topic or a deck list you want us to discuss, you can either use the contact form on our website or email us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. I'm Adrian Gonzalez.
I'm Michael Petchek.
And we're signing off for Color Commentary.